And because he's been here, he's been a student of the Brahmo Kumaris for almost 20 years, I think, a long time. I've known David for 30, a little bit over 30, I think. And well, he's just got a stellar reputation in this area, so he's the perfect one for us to talk to tonight. David lives up in Antigonish and has recently been working with the Coady International Institute, and in that role as one of the faculty there, he's met hundreds of students from around the world that all come to learn community development, international development, justice work, network building, and Indigenous wisdom. David's, I think most of your adult life you've been a social activist, you've been involved in social justice, so by the gray hairs, we know that's a while. You know, really short bio, I can never do David justice because there's so much richness to him, but he's recently just finished a PhD in Indigenous wisdom and had lived for 9+ years, I think, in Nigeria and did his PhD thesis there with the Dagara people around community resilience. Beautiful work. And the degree itself, I think, was done through a university in Ghana. So David spends quite a bit of time in Africa, back and forth, working, living there. He's just recently come off a peace walk across parts of India and involved with the water walk here locally with our First Nations community. So, and I know has strong feelings about some of the things that are going on in the world right now. So it's been a journey for all of us, but I know David's been very actively in this journey of, I don't know so much if it's squaring, reconciling spirituality with social justice, but I think all of us know that some of the passion and the aggression and the anger that gets ignited when we see injustice in the world doesn't really seem to square with our cultivation of peaceful soulness. So I'm really curious, David, just to hear some of your, you know, what is the question there? Is that even the question? Something that needs to be reconciled, these two things? Or is it more, what's the new ingredient spirituality has added to social justice for you? I don't know, but you certainly have the background to be speaking about your journey in this domain. So just go ahead and welcome, David, and thank you for agreeing to do this, and just kick us off with some of the thoughts you've been having on this topic.
Well, it's great to be here and just have a chance to share and through that, you know, learn and process some of the things that I've been thinking about. One of the things I love about the time I've spent as a student of the Brahmo Kumaris is that you're allowed to be an ongoing student for for as long as you want.
Right.
And when we talk, you know, about a journey of learning, that's certainly something that I've embraced in my professional work and now my spiritual practice, etc. And it's always something to learn about. But this particular topic is a really important one for me because so much of my life, my eyes have been opened. I haven't, you know, been able to deny the inequities and the injustices in the world, whether they're from my time on the African continent or on the Asian continent, or working with communities here in Canada, whether they're people with disabilities or Indigenous communities or groups of women, or, you know, there's a lot of inequities and difficulties that I feel I've been exposed to and witnessed in my life, and that's been my vocation, trying to learn about that and trying to engage with that. And the last 20 years, I think, with the addition of some spiritual insights and some learnings about how many other social justice activists around the world have taken energy and power from a spiritual practice, has really helped me to try to combine the two and see how they can work together. And it's an ongoing learning, an ongoing journey.
So what is the question for you? Is it reconciling the two? Like, what do you do? I know recently with these the marches or the protests, for the Black Lives Matter, you know, you've had to sort of work with these feelings of that come up, and everything. We call it conviction. Sometimes we say it's passion, but definitely it can be anger and even aggression, and maybe even righteous indignation, outrage. There's a whole scale of emotions there that are in us, and they're also in the world. And so I know when you go to these marches, you're a very peaceful presence. I know that. But you also have to contend with some of that coming up inside of you too. How do you work with that? How do you acknowledge the pain and suffering and inequity out there without losing your peace, without getting pulled into aggression and outrage?
Yeah, I think as human beings on this journey at this time, our emotions, our feelings are pulled in different ways. And I think sometimes in solidarity with others, there's a catharsis, a sense of belonging, when some of that anger or sadness or strong desire for change is expressed. But I think what's important is to recognize, to stop and observe those emotions as they come up, and be conscious that you're going to use them in a particular way, or be clear that you're going to stop them at a certain time and invest yourself in expressing the love, expressing the beauty, expressing the kind of emotions and energy. I think about it as energy, the kinds of energies you want to have in the world that you create for the future. So I think it's being conscious of those differences and not kind of denying them and pushing them aside, but having control over them and choosing what you're going to do with them.
So what does that look like? I mean, I understand this, the feeling of belonging and community in a shared rage. It's sort of like, the oldest team building strategy is to create a common enemy. So we all come together because we have a common enemy, but we understand that that enemy is also inside of us, the tendency to dominate or to oppress, and we wouldn't want to reinforce a victim. Our bond is based on our victimhood. I mean, that doesn't square with our spiritual appreciation of each soul as a master of their life, even if they don't feel that they are. And we know with infrastructures and systems that there isn't societal invitation avenue for mastery. It's very spiritual and internal. How do all those things come to play for you?
Yeah, I think I don't use the word rage, and I have to say, in a lot of my time as an activist, even very recently, the sense of rage has not been the driving emotion. Mm-hmm. The sense has been more, this is an opportunity to seize the time, to seize the moment for change, and recognizing that might be done in an outward sense, but that it's important to also think about doing that as an inward sense. Many people that I know and that are on this call tonight have probably heard me talk about Joanna Macy before. And she talks about, the 3 actions we need to make a difference in the world are holding actions, stopping the negativity, stopping the injustice sometimes, but just as importantly, creating the alternatives, making the kind of world we want to have. And thirdly, and just as importantly again, is changing our consciousness, changing our way of thinking. And, you know, so much about Black Lives Matter and the work that's being done on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and so much that's being done around environmental exploitation, etc. It's not just rage about this, it's educate yourself and understand what the situation is, and actually look internally within yourself of where is the love, where is the caring, where is the respect, where is the openness, where is the power to cooperate, and the power to understand where other people are coming from and give some of your energy to that.
As I listen to you speak, it feels like instead of rage, where you said rage isn't the driving, emotion or feeling, it feels more like it's recognizing an opportunity for healing, and it's collective. But also I hear you say, if I'm catching this right, is that the social justice movement is also being spiritualized, in the sense that people are understanding consciousness has to be changed as well as systems, which fits very nicely with our understanding here at the BK. As I change, the world changes. That if a structure gets changed, but I bring the same consciousness to the new structure, I'm going to mold it into the old thing pretty quickly. So it's not just about structures and systems, it's also about the thinking that goes into creating them has to be a different energy, as you were saying earlier. So you're holding that when you're involved with these groups and people and movements and marches and protests?
I'm holding it, or working on holding it, all my waking hours, all the time.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it's very much a way of being. We often say we're spiritual beings on our human journey. And I think on that human journey, we're getting pulled in many, many different kinds of directions all the time. And it's difficult to, or maybe it's not possible to deny that that's happening. But how, as spiritual beings, do we have some control over that? And are conscious of where the different poles are taking us, and are able to steer ourselves away from the negative things and towards the things that we want to be part in our life, and it takes courage to do that. It takes cooperation with others to do that. It takes, deep time as an individual and in the role we're playing in the world to discern what are the ways to turn, what are the choices we're going to make, and then make a decision and move forward with it. And I think all of those things are about, understanding the power within, and ultimately understanding that there is metaphysical power that can help us grow that power within, and that's different than the power over, the oppression in the world. And if we try to fight power over with power over, we're not going to get anywhere. So we have to find the power within, and the power with others, and the power to do things as actors, as players, as human beings on this journey, to try to create and make the world the way we want it to be, and make ourselves the way we want to be in that world.
For some, seeing the social justice protests or movements or actions, it very much seems like it's against. This is what we don't want. This has to change. And so what I hear you saying is the energy into what we want to create. And you don't always hear what you want to create in some of the social justice movements. You hear what we don't want. And I think as a human being, that's a constant practice to shift my own thinking from what I don't want, what I don't like, what isn't working for me, to what do I want. And the minute I shift in that direction, all kinds of solutions emerge, and the energy to create is there. Is this an easy move in the social justice world? I'm not, I wouldn't say. What percentage would you say think this way? I don't know that
Well,
we can
I,
know that, but
yeah, I don't know that. And I think so much of what we hear about the social justice movement is through the media that has their own perceptions and their own perspective on what that movement is about. You know, for many people that are activists involved in the movement, it's not something they've been involved in for the last 3 weeks or the last 3 months. It's often their vocation, you know, their lifetime's work. And they're individuals. They're on different journeys. They're at different places in their discernment and their analysis and what they're doing. And I think there's a variety of ways that people look at things. But I don't think there are people that are 100% about breaking things down. There's always some sense of creating the new. And I think there's actually some benefit in those being a both and rather than an either or.
it's
And
a living creative tension in a way.
Yeah, and going back to Joanna Macy, you know, it's not just that action in the world, it's also changing the consciousness. And that conscious change happens in ourselves. It has to happen in ourselves, but it happens through the solidarity and the communication and being with others. And I think an awful lot of people are involved in social justice movements because they're trying to learn, and even if it's unconscious, they're trying to change things within themselves just as much as they're trying to change things outside of the world.
Oh,
You
I
know,
think
Gandhi is still very often quoted about be the change you want
right.
to see in the world. And it's a slogan on t-shirts, but I think for a lot of people, you know, that's really important to them. That's something we're working on. And for people involved in the meditation before we started, you know, playing Nemo's song about, you know, keep on loving, keep on caring, keep on sharing. I mean, those of us who've had the opportunity to meet him, he embodies that. And he's very aware of what the inequities are in the world and the violence that occurs in the world in different ways. But he's put himself, you know, forefront of bringing that positive energy into everything we do.
It's a nice, I feel like it's a nice description of a living dynamic. You know, it's not like we're here to solve it or, you know, silly question, what percentage would you, you know, anyways. But the point being that it's a living dynamic within the social justice and the spiritual, and in a way blending them together is you're becoming an embodiment of the blend. You know, you're there in those gatherings, but not with a blame or an anger energy. You're there thinking about creating. And I certainly know from all the groups I've been in, you know, the group starts to fall apart when the anger gets turned inwards, because that same amount of anger turning outwards also then gets turned into the group, and then the whole thing, you know, it's not lovely. And so the capacity to deal with that anger, which is so, you know, justifiably there, is something that not all groups have, you know. So it's not just about rising above it, it is sorting it within yourself, you know, that kind of healing process for each of us. Because anytime we see injustice, it can poke, you know, it can poke any of the injustices I've experienced, or the, you know, the smallness I might feel in myself, or the victimhood I might feel where I've been oppressed or I've suppressed myself, you know, in the name of thinking I had to, you know. And all of this very living reality inside of us as souls at this time, and we bring that to anything we do, including social justice.
Yeah, and so much of what you see people talking about now in you know, social movement communities is about self-care. And I didn't see people talking about that as much 20 or 30 years ago.
Wow.
You know, people are recognizing not only do they have to take a break and breathe, but they really have to think about, am I being what I want to be in this movement? Not just about doing all of the things, but am I being what I want to be? And putting some of those actions in perspective in terms of a greater sense of time, a greater sense of historical movements, and maybe a greater hope for what can happen in the future. And all of those things only happen when people spend the time to look internally and think about themselves and who they are, and take care of themselves as spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, everyone who's with us tonight, we all feel that it's time, and we feel the need for the world to change. We feel hurt by the sorrow and suffering that happens, and it's sort of, you know, inherent in the old souls, you know, to use that spiritual term, that, you know, unless everybody out there is doing okay, I'm really not going to just be able to rest on my laurels. I mean, I will enjoy what my life has offered me and what I have, but it's not going to be okay that, you know, 8/10 of the world's population is still suffering out there. I can't cordon myself off and say, I'm going to live here in my little paradise and forget about you. It's just not in us. So I think we all share a feeling and a real, maybe even urgency, that it's time for change. And in a way, I look at the social movements and the social protests of today as the collective voice is growing, and each of us enacting it in our own ways. But there's a collective groundswell, you know, the critical mass is building. And whether I'm doing it in a protest or I'm doing it through changing consciousness, it's happening and it's affecting all of us at this time, which I find really kind of exciting.
Well, I think it's a very unique time. I mean, you might have seen the list that's gone around of the New York Times bestsellers list in the last 3 weeks, and they're all books about, you know, exploring racism and the creation of race and all of those kinds of things. And people are reaching out and trying to learn about those kinds of things while they're stuck at home under the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
So there's that kind of learning that goes on. It's not all spiritual learning, but it is, I think, a step in that direction.
Consciousness.
Consciousness,
For sure. Changing consciousness.
And we're at that, you know, unique time, I think, in the world where, you know, many different kinds of things are coming together, whether it's the climate crisis and the tipping point, you know, that's been talked about, or whether it's the people have written about the great turning, you know, that it's a time where the materialism and consumerism and sort of single focus of globalization has accelerated to such a point exponentially that if we don't change it, the carrying capacity of the globe is going to finish. You know, the inequities, the refugee crises, all of those things are just going to accelerate. So it's a time in the world, I think, where we have to be observant of those things, but at the same time recognize that just as this is a special moment, it is a special moment in the context of many years, many thousands of years, maybe many lifetimes that we've lived. And we have to both engage as much as we choose to engage and recognize that we have to act our age. You know, we're a soul playing a role in the drama at this time. And there's lots of other things going on and lots of things that have gone on in the past and gone on in the future, and we just need to be the best we can be at this particular time and take care of ourselves first and learn first for ourselves, and then do the best we can in that big old bad world out there that's in front
Well,
of us.
and keep our energy stable at that highest quality that you were describing, right? Which is what taking care of yourself means, is that you're replenishing your energy so you don't go in depleted and find yourself getting irritated or outraged or whatever. I was going to ask how you protect yourself from being overwhelmed, because you are up to your eyeballs in the world's issues, really. Or have been in the last few years, especially, you know, and exposure to directly to people who are coming from all the situations you just described. You know, how do you keep yourself from being overwhelmed by it?
You know, I think I probably take just as much energy from the situations as the situations might take from me. I think relationships are important in many ways. And when people talk about writing relationships, there's this sense of how do I interact with others so I'm in no way causing more negativity or misunderstandings or pain or sorrow for them. How can I give to them the love and caring and sharing that Nemo sings about? And I find when you do that, it's like the other video you played about pure vision. When you do that in an outward sense, you get that kind of power, energy back to you. So if you have a spiritual practice, you can get that energy from another source, a divine source. But in your relations in the world, if you give out that energy, I find you also get that kind of energy back.
Many of the social justice, they seem, they're issues, and the issues tend to be related to body color, body gender, you know, aside from the climate, which is materialism. But, and here you are I know your background, you know, you have an ostensibly white body, but coming from, you know, a mom from Guyana and a father from Nova Scotia. So, you know, the blend is in you and the exposure has been there always. And you've defined yourself as white, even though technically it could have gone the other way and you could have said you were black. Really, it was either way, right? And, you know, we've had this discussion before. But you're in a white body and you're with people, many people. Some of your dearest friends in the world have black bodies, dark bodies. And as souls, we know we're not the body. And so such a powerful bodily identification with the story that goes with a color or the story that goes with gender, and real lived experiences, not just historical stories, my story on a daily basis, being a woman or being black or whatever. How do you relate? I imagine you just stay quiet. It would be the only sensible thing to do, is to not talk about we're all souls and bodies are secondary. How do you connect with that? How do you bring those two together? How do you think about those things?
I mean, again, it's ongoing learning, right? I mean, I think we're all socialized in various ways about various things. And I think I have very much been socialized as a large white male. Some of those things I accept as part of my identity. Some of those things I realize they have been created by the society around me. They haven't been something that I have intentionally chosen. And I think for a lot of people that have been racialized or called disabled or other things, it's not so much their chosen identity, is how the society around them has defined them. And sometimes then in that that struggle or that exploration of self-worth and self-esteem, you can claim certain identities and talk about why you're proud of these cultural backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, etc. But another layer beyond that that I find with a lot of the people that I interact with, and there's no coincidence, I don't think, of who I interact with, is they have they have some kind of a spiritual practice of their own. They have an understanding of themselves, yes, potentially with blood memories because of their ethnicity and their ancestors, etc. And all of that is very, very important, and they care about that. But at the same time, I think they have a sense that there's a unexplainable part of who we are as human beings that is separate somehow, that comes from another place. You know, Alan Syliboy, the Mi'kmaq artist that many people probably know, often puts little stars in his paintings. Almost all of his paintings have little stars at some point. And I was in a workshop with him one time, and he explained that's because in the cosmology of the Mi'kmaq people, they understand that they come from the stars and that they're going to go back to the stars, you know? And that's not something they talk about all the time, but that's a deep part of the cosmology. And the rest of the identity issues, either that they claim or the society around them has put on them, in their best moments and all of our best moments, those can be put aside, and we recognize that we are spiritual beings. You know, also from my learnings from the Mi'kmaq Nation, you know, the end of every prayer is Entogama, all my relations. And it's not just my family and friends and community. It's not just all beings. It's my relations with all living beings on the planet. It's my relation with the elements. It's my relation with, you know, the wind and the water and the stars and the cosmos. So there's this sense that we have an interdependence with all of those things, and we have to right our relationships. We have to have the love and caring in our relationships with all of those things. So it's not to deny and say we're all the same color, or color doesn't matter, or we appreciate diversity, but it's to recognize that there's a part of us that, or the truth of who we are, transcends all of that. And we can appreciate, we can have problems with the costumes we are given at different times, but in fact, who we are as spiritual beings on this human journey is something quite different. And I've been able to have some of those conversations with people directly.
Nice.
And at other times, there's a sense that we're both, or we're all exploring those kinds of things in different ways. And I feel very blessed the people I interact with are willing to learn and explore and look at those kinds of things.
And it's very much because of the relationships being right that that's possible. And that's it. I'm going to open the floor to questions, because that's usually what we do now. And I'm going to ask you to use the chat box if you don't mind. So just type a question in the chat box, and then David and I will continue to converse and then answer them as they come up. David, as I listen to you, you know, I hear, it's lovely hearing you, one, because you're so lovely, but also just the insight into that world. You know, it feels like whether today our focus is on this group or on that issue or on that, what is happening is that we're all coming together, and there's this feeling of unity, and maybe COVID sped that up a little bit. But, you know, while it's also pulling apart and saying, no, this group and now this group, at the same time, it's like everybody is in the same boat. It's just, it seems to rotate. This week now it's about this, then next week, you know, it's just so front and center for all of us that we're all in it. We all see, oh, I can identify with that, but not so much with that. But oh, but that, with that, and we're all in there. And when I listen to you speak, I know you're a very compassionate person, but I wouldn't say that it's the compassion that I hear as much in the way you're describing, and possibly not even in the way you approach your friends and colleagues and peers and all those wonderful people you're marching and being with. It feels to me more like what you're bringing to the table is such a profound respect for every one of those beings, human beings, and a genuine interest in who they are and what they're about. And I mean, to me, that's amazing. That, like, to me, I find that so much more powerful and inspiring than, I don't want to say just compassion, because compassion is really powerful, but I think it's maybe not enough, like the respect and interest is very powerful. Okay, so we got a couple questions on the go here, and I'll read them out. David, is there any talk about a rainbow tribe? It is not about being black or white or yellow or red, but one family. Black rainbow tribes, red rainbow tribes, white, etc. One or now how? So that's from Jen, if you want to answer that one, David. And then Mara's asking, can you share more about the first 2 of the 3 steps from Joanna Macy?
Okay, in terms of a rainbow tribe, I think people talk about different things. There's lots of different ways of looking at ethnicity and race, but I think recognizing that race is a social construct like gender is something we all need to get our heads around, and it takes a while to do that, and to then appreciate the differences and respect the differences and the historical differences and traumas that may have been caused because of that, but not to let it define who we are as spiritual beings. It's one element, but it's not the whole thing. So there's value in different costumes that people wear at different times, that souls wear at different times, and to appreciate that and to get to know the differences.
And the Joanna Macy, the 2 steps. 3 steps, so the first 2.
Yeah, so the first 2, she talks about holding actions as the first one, or resistance to the problems, the negativity in the world. Some of what we may have heard in recent activities is dismantling the colonial police structures and where all that comes from historically. So that's a holding action. That's to stop or at least slow down some of the negativity of what's happening right now. The second one is creating alternatives. Finding a way if people are not living cooperatively together and there are financial inequities, etc. How do we create ways in smaller communities where we can get the food and shelter, etc., that we need in a different kind of way with a different kind of arrangement? So that would be creating alternatives. And of course, there's a million different ways you can create alternatives, and there's a million different ways you can slow down or stop the negativity, the problems, the perpetuation of the problems you see in the world. But I think her really crucial point that struck me and has stood with me for a long time is just as important as those 2 is the third one, which is changing consciousness in ourselves and in the movements we're involved in.
So a couple of books from her, and maybe we can type that in later if you don't want to. Yeah,
I can add that in. One of her newest ones, right now, it's called Hope. Hope in Troubled Times or something. The names aren't coming with me, but I can share those.
Beautiful. Please do, David. And Anne Marie's asking, how do you stay stable in the midst of anger? How can I make room for others' anger without fleeing or joining in?
You know, I mentioned this the other day, and I touched on it already this evening, the catharsis that can come from anger. So I'll confess to you all here now, my spiritual family, that I can sometimes join in the anger, but I think it's in a controlled way. It's a conscious choice where I will let some anger come out of this body at this time because the situation is overwhelming. I recognize and empathize with the people around me and the stories they're expressing, and the hurt I feel in their voices, or the challenges I feel in their voices. So to let some of that come up, I find can be cathartic in some ways, but then not to see it as part of you, but to see it as something that has come out of you that can then be put aside, and to ensure that there's a respect and a hearing of what's coming from other people, but to try to be differently in that situation.
You know,
Is the question, or and Judy, you've had these experiences as well. You've been a social activist in your day.
Yeah, the book is called Act of Hope. Thanks, Deb, for adding that title, Act of Hope. So you'll get that, Mara, and we'll all read it. Okay. Yeah, I think the you know, the difference between conviction and anger, and, you know, the outrage and the righteous indignation, we did a little continuum of all the feelings that do come out in the gathering, at least that I've experienced anyways. And I think the channeling, you know, I mean, so often the anger that is expressed is because of real hurt, real unfulfilled need at some level. And so the empathy there for that, if you can see it. But how easy it is to jump into the quicksand with people and wrestle around with anger. And that's not been cathartic from my experience. It's been just more muddle and more polarity and more aggression and more. So yeah, it's finding your place in that. And David spoke quite a bit at the beginning about that, I think, in terms of, you know, the energy and the awareness that he brings to those gatherings, so that, you know, one, it's a bigger view. Two, he's there as a support for something new. Three, he's there for righting relationships. You know, there's so many things that were going on that you were bringing to that situation, David, that somehow it more than compensated for just straight anger. You know, it was much richer, what you were bringing.
You know, there's also this quote that I'm sure many people have heard over the years from this Australian Aboriginal woman, Lila Watson. And she said, "If you've come here to help me, I'm not interested. But if you're here because your liberation is wrapped up in mine, then let's work together." And that sense of liberation can be interpreted differently by different people.
Mm-hmm.
But what she says is your liberation. So when we're in those situations, if we think about ourselves and our own liberation, and if we want to be liberated from anger, if we want to be liberated from greed,
Mm-hmm.
if we want to be liberated from any negative thoughts that might cause us sorrow or might cause other people sorrow, then the work we're doing is about our own liberation in solidarity with others. It's not trying to work on what their anger is and make a difference in their anger at that moment. It's not about, you know, finding justice for other people for their 400 years of oppression. It's about working on liberating myself so I can be who I am in relationship with others during the drama that's going on around us.
So it's very compatible, the inner activism of the spiritual life you're leading and the expression of that in the social activism. Very compatible in terms of writing relationships. Jen has said she's got the book, she's got the thing on her fridge, so that's really cool, Jen. Very beautiful. And say the quote one more time, David, in case someone didn't write it down. If you come to help me, I'm not interested.
I'm not interested, but if you're here because your liberation is wrapped up in mine, then let's work together.
I think, we can get into the details of, so social activism, but social justice, when we take the injustice, so is righting the world going to come by creating a just world? And what does that mean for everyone? So when we see something not being fair, I feel like a little kid, with my sister. It's not fair. How come she gets like these feelings of not fair? It's not fair are very connected to justice, right? That it be fair. And then we get into equity and equality and all this kind of language. And in all of that, the kind of world, for us spiritually, we want, I don't even know that we would say an equal world. What we want is a world of respect for all. What we want is a world of what we are generating and creating here at the center in all of our relationships is love, respect, acceptance, essentially all the virtues. So we don't really go down the equal equity path in our spiritual lives, but that's very much the conversation out there. How do you work with that yourself?
Creating a world of love, creating a world of respect, creating a world of I can think of equity and inequities. I think there's a virtue wrapped up in there some way. Is what I think many of us are dedicated to, wanting to see those things come to fruition. Justice is something I've started thinking about a little bit differently with some of my learning, from a ecosystem perspective, the sense of the cycles that individual living beings and forests and ecosystem, etc., go through. There are times of accumulation and there are times of creative destruction. These kinds of changes are happening in cyclical patterns all the time. So when I think we're engaged in something, we can look at justice in the moment and try to find some kind of equity and understanding and right relations with each other in the moment, in the time that we have some control over. But we have to be careful about spending a lot of waste thoughts, I think, in trying to change the past or predict the future and make it different, or changing other people's attitudes and other ways of being. There's a sense of being just in terms of what we can actually work on, what we can actually change, and that has to start with ourselves, and then those around us that we reach out to and interact with, and making sure that those are just relationships. And if we're involved in policy work, or if we're involved in an organization, or if there's historical things that are in the back of our minds that cause us sorrow in our own minds, then we have to work on that. But it's not necessarily finding justice at this moment outside in the world, because it's part of a much bigger picture. When a leaf falls off a tree in the fall, a beautiful red gorgeous leaf, we can say that's injustice. Like it was a beautiful, wonderful thing. Why did it fall at this time? But when we step back and have a broader perspective, and we see that as part of the cycle, part of the unfolding, I think it helps us be a little bit detached from what's going on right at the time. And that perspective, I think, is important.
I'll read them out, David, so you don't have to watch the screen. So Terry was saying, can you touch on your thoughts about how past experiences of oppression continue to affect the future? In your view, can we reach a point where past oppression does not affect the future? And what would it take to get there? And thank you for all your comments, Jen, adding for people to find out more about Joanna Macy. That's great. So past experiences of oppression, how they affect the future, and can we reach a point where the past oppression does not affect the future? What would it take to get there? Because very much in the justice conversation, often, you know, experiences, really traumatizing experiences of past, you know, either break a soul in a way that they really broke in, or they come back looking for vengeance in a way. It's an expression of anger. So the blame game is very much interwoven in all the way justice gets talked about in the world these days. But in response to Terry's question, David, what are you thinking?
Yeah, you know, because of the way I've been socialized, the way I've been racialized, I don't feel I have that many personal experiences of oppression. You know, I can talk about some in my professional work, but in society at large, I've been quite privileged. I also feel I've been very privileged and very honored with the people that I've interacted with, both in Canada and in other countries over the years. And you know, when they talk about how things that happened in their childhood, things that happened to their parents, things that happened to their ancestors, to their country, to the land that their ancestors are buried in, I can resonate with that. I can relate to that. I feel a truth in what they're saying about those things. And I think we can all make small steps in the present to do what we can to help people focus on themselves as spiritual beings at this time, to put some perspective on those blood memories, those historical memories, etc. And if we have memories maybe of being the oppressors as well as the oppressed in our background, in our fantasies, in our past lives, etc., you know, we can cleanse those thoughts. We can work with those thoughts to try to right relationships in the current time with our relationships in the current time. But can we clean it all up? Can we solve it totally at this point? I think we can contribute to that, but it's that sense of the unique point we're in the history of the world, the history of the earth, the history of the ecosystem, and there needs to be some energy from outside that has to come in and help us clean ourselves up. And I think that's why the changing consciousness and recognizing there's metaphysical, there's divine, there's other energies in the world that can assist us and help us. It will only be through that the ultimate cleansing will take place. So I think the oppressions of the past do affect the present and affect the future. And we can mess around and do a little bit about them, but we need energy from elsewhere to do the job for eternity that needs to be done.
It's when you use the word solve, it kind of struck me that in the paradigm of fixing the world, we look to solve things, but with, you know, divine energy, with spiritual tuning into higher power, and that we actually resolve, you know, instead of solve. And it's like resolving discordant energies, resolving the energies, the wounds, the oppressions, the dominance, all those things. It's sort of like energetically, we have to change the frequency of all of it, and it's not solving anymore. It's just, we're not going to get there by solving. It's like resolving, like a resolution of something. So very different paradigm.
I read something recently. The Dagara people that I've worked with in northern Ghana, they have initiation rites to help you understand your role as a whole being, both spiritual and physical being in the world. It usually happens around adolescence, where you've been pretty much focused on the body that you have for a while. And the way that they described the initiation was going through a process of breaking yourself up into 1,000 different pieces that are flung around in different directions, and then bringing them back together again. And that it's that sense of then understanding these pieces in time, in interdependence with nature and interdependence with each other, etc., that helps make you a full being that can then walk your journey in the earth.
Isn't that delightful? It feels true for us, doesn't it? We've all sort of broken up in a million pieces, and now we have to bring it all back together again in a whole. Wow, I mean, we've had quite a romp. We've been here, there, and everywhere. We've touched on a lot of the main, you know, words, the buzzwords in the area. I'm wondering if anyone else has, because usually we end around this time with a meditation. Well, we usually another 5-10 minutes or so with a meditation, but maybe let's just have a moment of silence together now and just let whatever's been said settle. And then if there is there's that one thing I'd really like to ask. How has this been for you, David? Anything you would like to add that wasn't part of a question?
No, it's wonderful to have the opportunity and great questions from others and from you, Judy, and having the conversation. And I could do this for hours on end.
All right then. So let's just carry on, shall we? Okay, nothing that you would add. Okay, Anne-Marie, I feel like outrage ally sometimes. Can I really be committed to change without outrage? Outrage equals ally. You can only be an ally if you're also outraged. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. It's not easy to do, but I think you can. Judy, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking of Rachel in the Millennial Gang, right? And how, you know, how quick the political correctness will slap a finger of someone who's being an ally, and her like internal mantra is, I just want to be an ally. You know, it's sort of like my intention is like, I'm on your side. I'm actually the one listening to you. I'm actually here because I want to, and that, yeah, not being outraged sort of disqualifies you as an ally. And that's some of, you know, what she relates or reports of the millennial crowd. And so I get where you're coming from, Anne-Marie, is that if you're not outraged, are you really an ally? And maybe that's where David's useful anger expression from time to time. I don't know.
I think you can understand someone's outrage
Mhm.
and respect and honor their outrage without internally getting outraged yourself.
Mhm.
If you have a different perspective on what's going on, and that's not to be inauthentic with others, because you're going to acknowledge and respect their outrage. But maybe it's an opportunity to talk about where you're coming from and to make it clear that it's not, you know, you're coming to them as a spiritual person,
Friend and partner.
Yeah.
Acknowledge and respect, says Anne Marie. Lovely. And Robert, beautiful things. Fire versus water. We can always react like fire, but water is a better way to deal with crisis. And in the end, the spirit in me acknowledges the spirit in you. Isn't that what we really need to do? So the namaste I honor, very much part of all the traditions, I think, that you have been, well, indigenous wisdom would hold that very true all over the world, wouldn't it, David? And honoring of I see you and respect. Yeah. Okay, so any last questions could get popped in there? I feel like we just started, David, and I'm going to walk away from this conversation. There'll be 20 other questions I didn't ask. We were just sort of tippy-toeing in, but that's okay. Maybe another day we'll have part 2. And the intention was really, I guess it was just to explore spirituality and social justice, and I feel like we've blended them this evening. I feel we've taken some of the core concepts maybe from each as if they were different, and it feels like they've really come together. And maybe that's because you're integrating so much, David. You are the embodiment of these two, and it's integrating in you so naturally that it doesn't seem like an either or for you.
Yeah, I don't know if people are familiar with Spike Lee's film "Do the Right Thing," and if you are but haven't seen it recently, it's a very important film, I think, to watch again during this time, because at the crisis moment for the character that Spike Lee is playing, and everyone interprets this differently, but he contributes to the violence, but I don't think it's out of outrage. I don't think you see the outrage in him. I think you see him making a decision, a tactic in that particular moment of time to move the drama forward in a particular way. But I think he's in control at that time. And I mean, we can interpret it, you know, many different ways, but it's not that he gets outraged and does things that he's unconscious of doing. But as a member of the community, as an ally for what's going on in that situation, he takes an action in the play, in the drama, that does a particular thing, but he's conscious of that and in control of that as it moves forward. So it's a brilliant film, and I hope I didn't spoil it if people haven't seen it yet, but it's well worth looking at from a social justice perspective and from a spiritual conscious perspective.
Charmaine saying, thanks to both of you for this lovely integrative chat. Yes, that's how I feel about it too. Leaves me with much to ponder and to change. Take good care. I think we'll end with a meditation, David, and usually, I mean, if you're willing, just to even to do 3 or 4 minutes, just share some of your thoughts that will take us into the zone kind of thing. But I'll say thank you before we do that for coming and for offering of yourself so beautifully to us. And you know, these are decades of reflections and conversations that have just come out in the last hour. I feel like we got the cream of your churning for years and years and years, and we've just skimmed the surface. So thank you for that. And I think at this time, of course, we want to bring the quality of energy to the world that rights all relations. So very lovely. So do you mind just taking us 2 or 3 minutes into a quiet inner state with a few words to ground us, and then we'll be off for the evening.
Sure, and thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to have been here and had a chance to do some of my churning and put it up there. So take a deep breath. Center yourself. Put aside some of what we've discussed. Put aside the situations in the world that have motivated this discussion. Put them aside just for a moment. And remember that our true nature is as spiritual beings on this human journey. On this journey of learning. And that we have the opportunity in our own time, in our own way, to fill with beauty and creativity. To make peace for ourselves and for those around us. Even if it's momentary. And to spend time in silence, to digest what's happening around us. To do some deep thinking about ourselves and this time in the world. And to fill with love from the divine source and be the best we can be. And nurture that love and appreciation for the self. And bring the new powers that come with that love out in the world. To create light in these particular times. Om Shanti.